Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So I'm here with the second update for my palette of the month, where I'll be talking about the eyeshadow palette that I used in February, and then I'll be introducing the palette I'm using for March. So the palette that I used in February was the Urban Decay 15th Anniversary palette, and it is kind of hard to show because it is mirrored, but this is what the palette looks like inside. So there's different columns. There's like lighter shades, there's colorful shades, and then darker shades. A lot of the shades are very shimmery. I think there's one matte shade which is Blackout, but overall a very kind of shimmery palette. And I tend to be someone who wears a lot of neutral, a lot of nude shades. So this was definitely sort of outside of my comfort zone, but I ended up really liking it. It was kind of fun to experiment with color. And with this particular palette, I appreciated it because it's not all color. There's definitely some more sort of neutral, sort of colors I'm more used to type of shades, which I could pair with colors. So I ended up really enjoying this, and that's why I'm really liking this sort of challenge, because it's really getting me to use stuff in my collection that I might be a little like scared to use. You know, I tend to go for my like Naked palettes, or now my Anastasia Beverly Hills palette, the Modern Renaissance, and other stuff kind of just sits there. So it's kind of nice to, you know, get a chance to play around with some different things. So I can go shade by shade. So the first one is Midnight Rodeo. This is definitely the most glittery, chunky glitter shade. It kind of reminds me of like the old school Urban Decay shadows. I think it's like Midnight Cowboy Rides Again. I think I had that one at some point, but very like glittery with glitter fallout. So it reminds me of that. So it's a pretty color, very pretty kind of champagne color, but that sort of chunky glitter I'm not crazy about, but it is pretty for the right sort of look. Then there's Midnight 15. Midnight 15 is much more, there's the shimmery shade. There isn't like chunky glitter, so it's a much more sort of wearable version of like the Midnight Rodeo. So this is one I'd wear sort of on a daily basis. It was, I think of everything in this palette, that was the most sort of wearable shade. Then there's Vanilla. It's like a little more yellow toned, but it's not super like deep or dark, so I could also wear this sort of a daily basis type of shade. I did enjoy this one. Then there's Flow, a little more orange. This one is actually really pretty, and it's kind of nice that it has an orange shade. I know that like warm tones are really popular now, so it's kind of nice to have that sort of shade in this palette. And then Chase is the one on the bottom. I think Chase would be, if I were to use this palette all the time, I think Chase would be my kind of like most worn type of shade, like the one I really gravitate to. It's really a pretty shade, so I really like that. And then the colorful shades, there's Tainted, and then there's Junk Show, so that's two pink shades. I tried to do a look, I think, with Junk Show like all over the lid, and I'm like, it looks kind of crazy. So then I think I took that off and used like Tainted all over the lid and kind of used Junk Show as like an accent color, and I really liked that way. I think Tainted is just kind of a softer pink, and it looks pretty sort of all over the lid. It's actually a really pretty shade, and it's one I haven't really gotten much use out of, but I think it's really pretty color. And then there's Omen, which is the sort of electric sort of purple shade. I liked that one. A lot of these colorful shades, I like to put them sort of on the lower lash line as like a pop of color, and Omen worked really well for that. Then there's Evidence, which is sort of a satin like navy shade. That one was pretty like all over the lid. If I wanted to do something sort of darker, a little maybe grungy, but with like an interesting shade, I think that one worked well for that. And then finally Deep End. I think my favorite look I did with Deep End, I used this on the lower lash line for like a pop of color, and then I had Chase all over the lid and then deeper in the outer corner. I think that was my favorite kind of combination of shades. And then I did another look with Deep End with that like sort of all over the lid. That I don't know if it was my absolute favorite. Like, I like a little bit of color. I don't always like looks that are like full on color, at least on me. But you know, it's still kind of fun to play around with. And then as far as the darker shades, I mentioned Deeper. I use that one kind of in combination with Chaser. They're very similar shades, but Deeper, as the name kind of suggests, it just kind of helps to deepen up the look. So I did like that. Then there's MIA. I use that. I feel like a lot of the darker shades I kind of would use as kind of deepening shades, or not necessarily like as the like full on like look. So that shade's very pretty. Then Ace, I used Ace when I used Evidence, kind of for that sort of grungy type look. Then Blackout, the matte black. I don't know, I feel like a lot of palettes have black shades and I tend to not use them a lot, but I did use this maybe a few times, you know, if I was wearing like a black liner to sort of set the liner. And then finally Half Truth, and this one was actually really pretty. It looks like it's a gray, but it's actually more like a purple. I'll do a swatch of it because I feel like you can't really tell the shade from the pan, but and I feel like my swatch just makes it look like it's like kind of a gray, but it's actually like a purple. I don't know if you can kind of tell from my finger, but it's really, really pretty. That one I enjoyed. I think I wore that a few times, just like all over the lid. It's kind of still like a dark look, but it was interesting that it was more like a purple than a gray. So overall, I really enjoy this palette. It's just kind of fun to use something that has like colorful shades and just things that I wouldn't normally gravitate towards, because it kind of makes you like think more about the look that you're gonna do. So I did really enjoy this. I did pair this with the Urban Decay Naked Basics 2 little palette. This is very shimmery, and I feel like I needed to add some sort of more basic shades to sort of complete the look. So I did use this little palette. This palette's great. I think a lot of palettes don't really have like the sort of basic shades. Like you need a few additional things to sort of complete the look. So I think having this palette is kind of nice because I can just kind of pair it with anything that is kind of lacking those sort of shades. So I used from this palette Skimp, which is this first sort of cream matte shade, and that I just use as a brow bone highlight. It's kind of my go-to brow bone highlight. Let's see, Stark I like sometimes. If I wanted to take a break from all the shimmer from that other palette, I wanted to do something a little more basic, I would just use this on its own. So Stark would be like a shade if I just wanted to kind of had a simple look. I'd wear like Stark all over the lid. Then Frisk is this kind of more taupey shade. For this, I would either use that as sort of a crease color or also as an all over the lid shade. Also Cover, I would sometimes maybe use that as a crease shade or all over the lid. Then Primal, I think I use Primal all over the lid as well. And then Undone I like because it is a matte sort of, it's like a softer black. It's not as harsh as something like Blackout, which is like a true black. So I actually like this for sort of like setting a liner. It just is a little more like subtle. So I really enjoyed the combination of those two palettes. I think they worked well together and kind of complemented each other well. So that's what I used for February. Now moving on to March. So for March, I decided I wanted to try out a different brand because I have a lot of Urban Decay palettes. I still have all my Naked palettes to use. So I think those will be for the next few months of this challenge. But for March, I wanted to use my Make It Forever palette. It's the Artist Shadow palette. It's a 9-pan palette, and it's the #1 version, the Nudes version. So this is what the palette looks like. And this palette it came with like a little like booklet that has different looks and kind of talks about the palette. But the way the little booklet describes it is this palette is actually made up of 3 different trios. Now, of course, you could use this palette in any combination of colors, but technically the trios are this column, which is the chic look, the middle column, which is natural look, and then this one on the end, which is smoky. What I'm wearing today is, or actually so far, I mean, it's only been a few days that I've been using this, but so far I've only used stuff from the middle column, and I feel like that tends to be the, like, eyeshadows that I gravitate to most in this palette are these natural look shades. So I mean, I love all of those shades, but I really want to sort of challenge myself to use these other shades that I don't really gravitate to as much. But yeah, and I think this will be different because it's definitely much more of a neutral palette and nude shade palette, where the other one was very colorful. So this is something I'm a little bit more comfortable with. But those were Urban Decay shades, which I'm kind of more familiar with because I have like all the Naked palettes. It's like the eyeshadows that I use most like frequently are Urban Decay, so I'm really used to that formula, where this is definitely a different formula. These are very heavily like dimethicone based shadows, like silicone shadows. I was reading in the little booklet, it kind of describes the consistency as like gel cream. They're definitely like a thicker formula, so it takes a little bit to get used to working with these. But I think they are very pretty. So something I want to do with these shadows, this little book has like different looks. So with each trio, it has like a different little look. So I thought it'd be fun as I use this to just try out all the different looks to kind of see how they're suggesting to use them. And then, you know, I can kind of play off of that. So today I tried to do the natural look. It didn't exactly turn out how I really wanted it. So I kind of went ahead and put this middle shade like all over the lid. But you know, it's kind of fun to start off as like a starting point with those like suggested looks and then kind of build from there. But yeah, that's this palette. Yeah, I'm just hoping to kind of, you know, experiment around with this. I got this palette, it was like in Christmas 2015, so I've had it for, it's like over 2 years now. I was really like drawn to this palette of like seeing the swatches. I kind of wanted to add like a new eyeshadow palette to my collection, and I was looking at different like palettes and swatches, and this one just sort of interested me a lot. And at that time I was hearing a lot about the Make It Forever eyeshadows, but they have like their singles, they have like an extensive collection, so I was sort of always like, I don't know which shades I like, and they're like pretty expensive single eyeshadows, so I'm like, it kind of makes sense to get a palette where you get like 9 different shades. Now they have since reformulated their eyeshadows, so I don't know how the new ones compare to these ones, but I don't know, it's definitely a different sort of formula than something like Urban Decay. But yeah, once I got it, I found myself sort of gravitating to these like middle shades, and then I'd be sort of like bored with the palette and like then use something else. But I really just want to challenge myself to, you know, try out all the different shades. Don't just stick to 3 and then say like, oh, this palette's kind of boring and like put it to the side. Like actually try using everything and use stuff in different ways than I would normally. So I think this will be a fun one. And yeah, that is the palette of the month for March. And again, with this palette, I will be adding in my Urban Decay Naked 2 Basics, just because this palette, it is very neutral. It just doesn't have a lot of the like brow bone highlight type of shades. Like none of these shades on top I really like using as a brow bone highlight. And there's a lot of shimmer in this. There's a few mattes. I think these 2 right here are mattes on this side, on the chic side, but I just like working a little bit more with some different sort of mattes. I will add this in. I don't know if I'll be using it as much as I used this past month when I used the Urban Decay 15th anniversary palette. We'll just kind of see, but I did want to kind of add that in as well. So that is the palette of the month for March. I'll be back next month with my kind of little recap on using this palette and to talk about the palette that I'll be using for April. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.